Following Michael Bloomberg's official entry into the 2020 Democratic primary, some red flags have been raised about the presidential hopeful. While his campaign website lists a slew of priorities like healthcare, energy reform, and gun safety, the former New York mayor has yet to detail how he plans to get things done.
Critics of Bloomberg, including our next guest, say that while Bloomberg likely won't win, he has a more favorable position than anyone else because a big part of the liberal Democratic sphere will just lay off of him because he has so much of his money in everybody's pockets. Zaid joins us now to expand on this and to share his personal experience covering Bloomberg while he was over at Think Progress. Zaid, we love talking to you, but this thread in particular, it really highlighted how much of the Bloomberg's money and the tentacles are within so much of professional Washington. Just share your own personal experience with what happened.
Yeah, so I'd say about 8-9 years ago, I was working at Think Progress, which was the weblog of the Center for American Progress, a major kind of Democratic Party-aligned think tank. I wrote a post about basically how Michael Bloomberg's girlfriend was on the board of Zuccotti Park, which is where Occupy Wall Street was. She was pulling in over $100,000 a year in compensation. Later, the president of Center for American Progress alerted myself and some people on my team that actually they were soliciting Bloomberg for money. She was quite upset with us, saying, December's a tough money-raising year. How can you be doing this? Why are you picking on his girlfriend? By the way, that's why we have spouse disclosures in Congress for their finances, because it actually matters if your spouse is getting paid by an interest where there's a conflict of interest. So I don't think it was really a cheap shot. But basically, I told this story to demonstrate that Bloomberg spends tens of millions of dollars, if not more. I think he actually spent up to $100 million in 2018 on Democratic candidates and causes. And I think this is going to have a chilling effect on the Democratic Party and liberal institutions because a lot of them realize that this is a major political giver and that if they piss him off, he may just turn around and stop funding them.
Well, didn't you point out that somebody who endorsed him had already received money from a nonprofit?
Yeah, actually the mayors of Columbia, South Carolina and Augusta, Georgia both came out and endorsed him. And actually both of them were in a class created by Bloomberg Philanthropies, where they get to go to Harvard and do a training and be highlighted with, I think, 40 mayors globally. So, I'm not saying that basically he bribed these people into endorsing him, but what I'm saying is that this money forges a relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that relationship makes it much more difficult for you to turn your back on someone who's been kind of feeding you.
Exactly.
Of course, who fed you in the past and may feed you in the future, too.
Yeah.
That's the way this works. Obviously, Michael Bloomberg used to be a Republican, endorsed Bush, endorsed Scott Brown over Elizabeth Warren. What makes him a Democrat?
Well, I think political convenience to a large extent makes him a Democrat.
Globalism, honestly, I really.
He was a Republican at one point. He was an independent at one point. He's a Democrat now.
Yeah.
And I think he shifted based on where the winds were going. He was with Bush in 2004. Bush won. He shifted into the Democratic Party as he was mayor of New York. He was an independent because he probably couldn't win a Democratic primary. He kind of does. He's a political chameleon in that way, although that does work for some people, including our current president, Donald Trump.
True.
Yeah, no, not a bad point. Zaid, another thing that we wanted to talk with you about, you highlighted this morning a thread showing that President Obama had actually told confidants back in 2016 that if Bernie were to become the nominee, that he would speak up against him. Is that consistent with what you think of the Obama machine and presidency? Because they really have said, they haven't said as much, so much in the future. I think we all suspected it, but that's pretty interesting.
Well, I think one thing to bear in mind is that Obama kind of sees himself as a standard bearer of the Democratic Party. And I think a lot of what Bernie Sanders represents and somewhat of what Elizabeth Warren represents is kind of a repudiation of Obama's approach, both politically and on the substance of policy.
Right.
And I think that, that he kind of sees him as encroaching on his territory. Now, you have to remember that in the last minute, Obama intervened in the DNC race for the chair race to support, to draft and then support Tom Perez to take out Keith Ellison, who was Bernie's candidate. So I think we've already seen this proxy war happen once. And I wouldn't be surprised if Obama did find a way to kind of put his thumb on the scales against Sanders if Sanders was getting a lot of traction or ended up getting close to winning. But I do think he tends to work behind the scenes because he wants to be seen as a uniting figure. That's always been his brand, is unity. So
yeah, well, you see it starting to come out in these comments about the activist left,
far left
and certain leftist Twitter feeds and whatever. So you already see it starting to come out. But I think it is important to take note of the fact that, his legacy is at stake, right? What is the one thing that you most associate with the Obama administration? It's the Affordable Care Act. So the candidates who want to move beyond that and actually push for Medicare for all, which really at this point there's only one candidate who is most firmly standing in that position, that is a direct threat to Obama's legacy.
I mean, this is something I think conservatives troll about sometimes, but they're kind of right when they say, why are all the Democrats saying we got to fix healthcare? I thought we already did it with the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
Well, the Affordable Care Act was kind of a Band-Aid. I mean, it did expand access for a lot of people, made insurance coverage a little bit more fair, but our costs are still skyrocketing.
Yes.
I mean,
it was industry approved.
Did
that's
basically
why.
nothing about costs, and I think that's why Sanders is emphasizing this kind of Medicare for all package. I think, at the end of the day, Obama is trying to make it a contest between extremism and pragmatism or something like that. I think Sanders knows how to compromise. He always has through the legislative process. He worked with a lot of Republicans to get VA reform done. He worked on the Affordable Care Act. But I think he thinks putting out a strong negotiating position by saying, hey, we need to have a single payer, free at point of service delivery, and then then you can negotiate from there. I think everyone else is kind of negotiating with themselves right now, which it might get you to a very different place at the end of the day.
That's the fascinating thing about this, right? Is like Bloomberg, Deval Patrick, Obama, all speaking out, are very much united in a single thing in which they don't like the progressive left, and they don't, obviously they look at the right in the same way. A lot of it seems is that they're protecting. In Obama's case, he's protecting his interests. But in Bloomberg and Deval Patrick's case, they seem very much to be protecting moneyed interests. And it's fascinating because you see that, actually, what do you think about this? Do you think they'll actually legitimately catch on within the Democratic primary? For Patrick, absolutely not. But with Bloomberg and the ocean of money he has, what do you think?
It's really hard to say. I mean, I think a lot of people who've studied this have said that typically someone who tries to enter this late
forget it.
Is not going to be able to do it. But he spent $30 million over the course of this week.
Yeah, right.
To put it in comparison, the other billionaire in the race, Tom Steyer, spent $1.2 million.
Yes.
Bernie Sanders spent about $500,000, I think, on TV ads this week. So that's a lot of money. Although at the same time, polls do show he's one of the most disliked candidates in the race total. I think something like almost half of Iowa Democratic voters do not like him.
Yeah, well, personally, watching the ad that he put up would make me less likely to want to vote for him, but that's just me.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to vote for him anyway. I do want to ask you, though, I almost feel like one of the best things that Bernie has going for him at this point is that the establishment can't wrap their head around the idea that he could actually win. I mean, you see him moving up in the polls. New poll of New Hampshire has him in first. New Morning Consult or early state poll has him in second, close behind Biden. He's gone up 8 points in that poll over the last little while. So he's clearly on the move. But I think a lot of the reaction is actually not to him, it's to Warren, because they just can't imagine that he would be the nominee such that Obama would come out or anyone would come out to really try to stop him in that way. What do you think?
Yeah, I think for a while, particularly the Biden camp was looking a lot at Warren because they saw her rising in the polls. The other thing that you have to understand is that when you actually poll the supporters of each candidate, most of Warren's supporters right now don't say they locked into supporting, or something like maybe 30 or 40% or less than that, less than 40.
Same with Pete Buttigieg. They're very much the same
Pete
thing.
and Warren's voters are very much up for grabs, whereas I think between 50 and 60% of Bernie's voters are locked into him. I think a similar percentage for Biden, or maybe a little bit less for Biden.
In Iowa, it was 71% for Bernie, 60% for Biden, 40% for Warren, 30% for Pete, roughly.
Yeah, so it actually makes a fair bit of sense to be trying to lower Warren and Pete's numbers by attacking them. Right now, it feels like you can't really do that much to Bernie until we get to a kind of a narrower field where he's expanding his base, which was naturally what will happen when the field narrows.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, generally, how do you see this playing? I mean, we talk about this here all the time, which is I seem to be there's two paths. There's one in which there is, Elizabeth Warren or somebody, different people win Iowa and New Hampshire, and they use that in order to sway black voters overwhelmingly who currently support Biden to backing them in South Carolina. The other thing is that somebody could, maybe Pete or Warren could win Iowa and New Hampshire, but then Biden comes through South Carolina, sweeps Super Tuesday, and ultimately sprints towards the nomination. What do you think about that?
I mean, politics is so difficult to predict, and usually everyone has egg on their face when they try to predict it. I do think Biden is probably the most likely nominee at this point. But I do think that if someone like a Sanders or a Warren were to sweep, let's say he lost the first 3 states, let's say he lost Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, then I think he may be in a more vulnerable position. I do think the idea that a large portion of Southern or black voters will shift from Biden if somebody else wins those states is not as well founded as it was in 2008, because I think a lot of those people really liked Obama, but they weren't sure he was viable. That Iowa win shifted a lot of their minds, whereas actually a lot of the voters in the South legitimately like Biden. Like, they say they're enthusiastic about him. It's not like
they're not holding their nose.
They're not settling for him. They actually really like him. So I think it would be difficult for me to see him weakening in kind of that Super Tuesday position, but maybe after that, maybe someone could overtake him in states outside the South.
Yeah, I think you're right. I generally fall in the same way.
I think so too. Zed, thank you.
Thank you, Zed.
We'll have more Rising after this.